tensions in the nearby Red Sea. A U.S. warship shot down 14 drones fired by suspected Houthi rebels in Yemen. A British warship also intercepted a drone.
Morning light stretched across the Red Sea in pale gold bands. The water was flat, steady, undisturbed by wind or swell. From above, nothing suggested instability. A U.S. carrier strike group advanced in disciplined formation, spaced precisely, maintaining speed consistent with routine transit through contested waters. No sharp turns, no acceleration, no public warnings. To an outside observer, it was just another patrol. Then the surface picture began to change. The first radar returns were so small they barely registered. Low-profile contacts, slow-moving, hugging the sea surface. They did not resemble aircraft. They did not track like missiles. They were too deliberate to be debris, too coordinated to be fishing boats. Operators did not sound alarms. They watched. Within minutes, more contacts appeared. 6 in total, each one insignificant alone. Together, forming geometry. They were not charging. They were not scattering. They were approaching. Steady, quiet, unidentified. They transmitted no AIS signals, no radio calls, no distress beacons. They did not maneuver away from a visible naval formation. They behaved like platforms with purpose, but without declaration. And that is what made the moment dangerous. Because this was not an obvious attack. It was a question. And in modern naval conflict, questions can be more destabilizing than weapons. The Red Sea is no longer neutral. Months earlier, the Red Sea had already shifted from trade corridor to pressure zone. The Iran-aligned Houthi movement in Yemen had redefined the region's rhythm through missile launches, drone strikes, and maritime harassment. Commercial shipping companies rerouted vessels around Africa. Insurance premiums surged. Cargo timelines stretched by weeks. The Houthis never formally declared a blockade. They didn't need to. Through repeated action, they established a conditional reality. Transit through these waters carried risk. When footage surfaced days earlier showing a merchant vessel burning, followed by a single word captioned beneath it, "Soon," the message was clear. Escalation doesn't need a timetable. It only needs intent. Washington responded with visible weight. A carrier strike group centered on the USS Abraham Lincoln moved deeper into the broader Middle East operating theater. Guided missile destroyers layered the formation. Air defense screens extended outward. Surveillance coverage intensified. Official language described it as defensive. But strategy communicates beyond press releases. Freedom of navigation is not symbolic. It is structural. Allowing a non-state actor to dictate maritime flow would ripple far beyond Yemen. The deployment was not theater. It was a boundary. And boundaries invite testing. Direct confrontation was never likely. Instead, the pattern that followed was familiar to regional observers. Probing behavior. Unmanned systems appearing at detection edges. Fast craft drifting near operational envelopes. Surveillance drones adjusting altitude and orbit patterns. Not attacks. Measurements. The 6 surface contacts now approaching the strike group fit precisely within that doctrine. They drifted, corrected course, paused, then resumed. Not rushing forward, but not retreating either. Their speed was slow enough to appear non-threatening. Their heading was deliberate enough to erase coincidence. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, classification algorithms worked continuously. Speed, wake pattern, infrared signature, structural profile, each variable compared against databases. Civilian craft? Unlikely. Drifting debris? Impossible. Improvised explosive drone boats? Possible. And that word, possible, compresses time. Distance is safety at sea, but distance was shrinking. Every minute unchallenged brought the objects closer to defensive thresholds. Yet engaging too early would risk transforming ambiguity into escalation. This is the trap of gray zone tactics. Force a reaction, fire too soon, and the opponent becomes the aggressor. Wait too long, and you risk vulnerability. The 6 small vessels continued inward. No acceleration, no communication, no deviation. For the Houthis, the boats themselves were expendable. What mattered was response data. How quickly did U.S. radar prioritize the tracks? Did escort destroyers alter formation spacing? Were helicopters launched? Did air patrol altitude change? Did the carrier shift speed? Each reaction, even subtle, yields intelligence. This is low-cost warfare by design. A single unmanned drone boat costs a fraction of a missile. Losing one means little. Force in a billion-dollar strike group to adjust course? That carries strategic optics. The goal was not necessarily detonation. It was pressure. If commercial vessels watching maritime updates interpreted the encounter as instability, the strategic effect multiplied. Insurance markets react to perception. Shipping companies reroute based on uncertainty. A 6-boat approach could reshape economic flows without firing a shot. That is the power of controlled ambiguity. Inside the strike group, the response began without spectacle. Monitoring levels rose incrementally. Surface search radar intensified resolution cycles. Electro-optical systems zoomed. Track correlation fused across platforms. No flares, no warning broadcasts, no visible aggression. The boats were not chased away. They were tracked, constantly. Each one assigned a unique identification marker. Speed vectors recalculated in real time, projected paths updated every few seconds. Defensive systems stood ready, but invisible. This was not hesitation. It was discipline. A premature warning shot would feed narrative. A dramatic interception would create headlines. The Houthis understood the information space as well as the kinetic one. The U.S. fleet chose a colder rhythm. If this was a test of emotional response, it would fail. The boats continued closing. Safety buffers dissolved into operational zones. Aircraft remained airborne, but at consistent altitude. Destroyers subtly adjusted spacing, not enough to signal alarm, but enough to refine defensive geometry. The approach had now entered the compression phase. At this range, if explosives were present, reaction windows shrink from minutes to seconds. And still, no shots, no alarms, only tracking. The 6 drone boats no longer drifted. They advanced. Not quickly, not recklessly, but with a steadiness that removed any remaining comfort from the operational picture. They crossed invisible lines naval planners normally treat as buffer zones, distances meant to provide time for identification and layered response. Now, time was thinning. Inside the strike group's network, tracking refresh cycles accelerated. What had once been wide-angle observation became close pattern scrutiny. Each hull signature was magnified. Infrared overlays scanned for engine heat inconsistencies. Wake turbulence was analyzed for abnormal propulsion behavior. Still no communication. Still no attempt at identification. They held formation, loose but coordinated, not clustered tightly enough to be a single target, not dispersed enough to be random. This was deliberate geometry. Projected intercept arcs now converged closer to high-value units. At this distance, if the boats carried explosive payloads, they could become lethal with very little warning. The difference between nuisance and catastrophe is measured in meters, and meters were disappearing. In conventional naval engagement, red lines are often signaled, warnings issued, channels opened, escalation ladder visible. This was different. There were no flares in the sky, no amplified bridge-to-bridge warnings echoing across open water, no aggressive intercept boats surging forward. The carrier group did not react theatrically. Instead, formation spacing narrowed slightly. Defensive layers subtly reconfigured. A destroyer's position shifted just enough to optimize overlapping fields of fire. Another adjusted bearing to refine missile engagement geometry. These movements were invisible to outside observers, but they were decisive. Inside the Combat Information Center, weapon systems were brought to ready status, not activated, not announced, simply prepared. Close-in weapon systems aligned silently. Interceptors calculated intercept solutions in advance. Air assets adjusted patrol vectors to provide redundant sensor coverage. No system fired, but every system was thinking. Because this moment, this narrowing window, is where gray zone probing loses flexibility. The closer the boats move, the fewer explanations remain available. At long range, they are questions. At close range, they become intent. At approximately 2 nautical miles, the engagement envelope transformed from theoretical to immediate. If the boats were harmless, reacting too soon would create unnecessary escalation. If they were weaponized, waiting too long could compress response time below survivable margins. This is the dilemma gray zone tactics are designed to create. One of the drone boats altered head-in by 3 degrees. Subtle, almost negligible, but enough to shift projected impact geometry toward the outer defensive screen. Algorithms flagged the change instantly. Operators leaned closer to their screens. No acceleration, no radio traffic, just forward motion. At this distance, worst-case scenarios are no longer planning exercises. They are viable. The boats were now close enough that debris from a detonation could threaten nearby vessels, even if interception succeeded. The risk profile expanded with every meter. Still, the fleet held. Because control in this phase is not about firing first. It is about choosing the exact moment when no ambiguity remains. Pressure is powerful only while uncertainty protects it. As the boats entered the inner surveillance ring, their continued advance began to narrow their own options. Turning away now would suggest reconnaissance complete. Continuing forward would signal hostility. Detonating early would reveal mission parameters. The advantage was shifting. The U.S. fleet had absorbed the approach without dramatic movement. No panicked reaction. No exposed thresholds. No visible overcommitment. If the boats were measuring response time, they now had their data. If they were meant to provoke overreaction, that script had failed. But they kept moving, and that changed the equation. Because once objects cross into terminal defensive geometry, decision authority tightens. Reaction windows collapse into automation thresholds. Weapon systems do not debate politics. They calculate velocity and distance. Inside the strike group, final engagement solutions were now preloaded. If triggered, response would not be gradual. It would be immediate. The boats entered what naval doctrine refers to as the point of no maneuver. At this range, sudden acceleration could close the remaining gap in seconds. Gun systems tracked in unison. Radar locks were clean, infrared signatures stable. The formation remained intact. No evasive turns, no visible alarm. From above, the Red Sea still looked calm. But beneath that calm, every calculation was live. The first drone boat reached a distance where, if it carried a high explosive payload, it could cause at least localized damage to escort vessels. 1 more minute, 30 seconds, 15. And then, the surface flashed. Not from defensive fire, from within. The first explosion was controlled and contained. A sharp vertical plume of water rising from the hull of the leading drone boat. No debris trajectory toward the fleet. No fragmentation pattern indicating external impact. The boat detonated itself. Seconds later, the second followed. Then the third. Each explosion separated by just enough delay to confirm intentional sequencing. No U.S. weapon systems fired. No interceptor streaked across the sky. The boats were destroying themselves, one after another. 6 flashes across the water's surface. 6 plumes of spray. Then debris. The sea settled almost immediately. No vessel was struck. No formation disrupted. No emergency maneuver required. Inside the Combat Information Center, tracking shifted from engagement to confirmation. Residual signatures analyzed. Secondary detonation probability assessed. None followed. The threat collapsed. Not through force, but through decision. From a purely tactical perspective, the outcome was clear. The boats failed to penetrate the defensive envelope. They did not alter the carrier's route. They did not delay transit. But the deeper question was not whether damage occurred. It was why the detonation happened at that exact moment. One explanation is remote termination. If the boat's purpose was reconnaissance, to measure response timing, tracking fidelity, and defensive posture, then the mission was complete. Continuing forward risked hardware capture. Destroying them preserved technical secrecy. Another possibility is denial of intelligence. Allowing the U.S. Navy to recover navigation modules, guidance chips, or communication systems would offer technical insights. Self-destruction eliminates that risk. In asymmetric warfare, denying the opponent data can be as important as collecting it. But both explanations share a limitation. Neither achieved psychological dominance. There was no forced overreaction, no dramatic footage of American ships firing at small craft, no political escalation. The carrier group remained on course. The silence held. And that is where the tactic faltered. Perfect. Continuing with Chunk 3, where tension shifts from tactical to strategic, and the true winner becomes clear. When the last plume of water collapsed back into the Red Sea, the encounter did not end with triumph or spectacle. It ended with continuity. The carrier strike group did not alter speed. It did not shift course. It did not fire in retaliation. From a distance, nothing appeared to have happened at all. And that was precisely the problem for those who initiated the probe. Gray zone tactics rely on reaction. They depend on forcing visible choices, escalation or retreat, that can be framed as success in media narratives or regional messaging. A dramatic defensive strike could be edited into footage suggesting American aggression. A rerouted formation could be framed as intimidation working. Neither occurred. The 6 drone boats vanished. The fleet remained. Pressure, once applied outward, began to flow backward. The ceiling of ambiguity. Ambiguity works only while it generates uncertainty. As long as the drone boats hovered at a distance, their purpose could remain undefined. They were questions suspended on water. But the moment they detonated themselves, ambiguity collapsed. Intent became visible, and effect remained absent. The boats had crossed into the inner envelope and failed to produce consequence. That exposure changed the equation. It demonstrated capability, yes. It showcased proximity, but it also revealed limitation. A tactic revealed too clearly loses elasticity. The Houthis operate in a space designed for low-cost disruption. They can harass shipping. They can complicate logistics. They can inject instability into insurance calculations. But forcing strategic redirection of a prepared carrier strike group requires more than proximity. It requires impact, and impact never arrived. It is tempting to view restraint as hesitation. In this case, restraint functioned as leverage. The U.S. fleet did not respond emotionally. It did not escalate for optics. It did not provide dramatic visuals of weapons engaging small craft. Instead, it absorbed the pressure. That absorption matters, because when an opponent expects reaction and receives none, they must escalate further to regain leverage. And escalation carries risk. The carrier group preserved operational order. No emergency maneuvers exposed defensive thresholds. No weapon discharge revealed engagement timing. No hurried communication betrayed internal urgency. From a strategic standpoint, that is control. Power at sea is not measured solely by firepower. It is measured by the ability to maintain movement despite provocation. The fleet moved forward, and forward movement, uninterrupted, is dominance in maritime strategy. In modern confrontations, optics are weapons. A single clip of defensive fire against small surface vessels could have been reframed across regional networks as excessive force. Political narratives could have amplified it. Diplomatic pressure could have followed. But without footage of dramatic engagement, the information space remained quiet. There was no escalation spiral to feed. The explosions belong to the initiators, not the defenders. And that distinction matters. When the initiating side detonates its own platforms without forcing visible reaction, the psychological objective weakens. The encounter becomes technical rather than emotional. Technical incidents do not generate strategic momentum. They fade. None of this means the probe was meaningless. The approaching drone boats almost certainly gathered valuable data. They observed radar prioritization timelines, defensive formation adjustments, aerial patrol consistency, engagement envelope tolerance, electronic surveillance behavior. Every second of tracking revealed patterns. But information collected does not equal leverage gained. The United States did not reveal reaction thresholds publicly. It did not allow hardware capture. It did not provide overreaction footage. The data gathered may refine future tactics, but the current encounter delivered no shift in maritime control. And that distinction is critical. The strategic layer above the surface. The Red Sea is not simply a regional theater. It is a strategic artery linking Europe and Asia. Disrupting it generates ripple effects across global supply chains. The probe tested whether persistent low-cost harassment could reshape that artery permanently. The answer, at least for this moment, was no. The carrier group's steady transit reinforced continuity. Shipping lanes did not close further. Commercial rerouting did not accelerate beyond existing patterns. Insurance markets did not spike dramatically from this event alone. The psychological ceiling had been reached. To alter strategic reality, a probe must create tangible disruption. 6 detonated drone boats created tension. They did not create transformation, but gray zone tactics evolve. Failure at one level encourages adaptation at another. Future probes may not rely solely on surface platforms. They may combine drone boats, low-altitude aerial drones, shore-based missile posture adjustments, coordinated information campaigns, multi-vector pressure compresses reaction windows further. Instead of 6 slow-moving contacts, the next encounter could involve simultaneous surface and air signatures, complicating defensive geometry. The danger lies not in what just happened, but in how quickly the pattern can scale. Because the line between probing and escalation narrows with each repetition, and repetition breeds normalization. The water has not grown calmer. It has grown measured. Each movement now carries layered meaning. Every small contact on radar becomes a potential strategic signal. The Red Sea has entered a phase where silence is not absence of activity. It is suspended calculation. Small unmanned systems will continue to appear. They are inexpensive, replaceable, adaptable. Carrier strike groups will continue to transit. They are structured, layered, controlled. The balance now rests not on who fires first, but on who controls tempo. In this encounter, tempo belonged to the fleet, but tempo can shift. And the next approach may not end in synchronized self-detonation. It may force a different kind of choice. What this encounter truly demonstrated: this was not a battle. It was a rehearsal, a measurement of patience, a test of discipline. 6 drone boats closed in. No shots were fired. No ships were hit. No course was altered. And in maritime strategy, unchanged course is outcome. Because when pressure fails to alter movement, it stops being leverage. It becomes background noise. The 6 detonations ended the moment. They did not end the pattern. Because in gray zone warfare, probes are not conclusions. They are iterations. The next approach may not involve a single vector. It may not rely on slow-moving surface platforms that telegraph proximity over minutes. It may combine surface drones with low-altitude aerial systems arriving simultaneously from separate bearings. That changes geometry. A single direction allows layered defense to compress and adapt. Multiple directions fracture attention. Defensive envelopes must stretch. Decision windows shrink. In that scenario, reaction time becomes the primary battlefield, and reaction time is finite. Imagine 6 surface drones approaching again, but this time accompanied by small, sea-skimming aerial drones hugging radar clutter. Electronic interference bursts designed to degrade tracking resolution. Shore-based missile systems shifting posture to complicate defensive planning. None of these need to strike. They only need to overlap. When systems overlap, ambiguity multiplies, classification slows, decision authority compresses, automation thresholds edge closer to activation. That is the real risk. The first probe tested patience. The next could test processing capacity. And capacity, unlike patience, can be saturated. There is another dimension to consider. Every restrained response creates incentive for the probing side to escalate slightly further next time. Not dramatically, incrementally. Closer approach distances, slightly faster speeds, more synchronized movement. Each increment seeks the invisible threshold. The moment the defending force reacts visibly, that becomes narrative leverage. The moment it does not react, pressure continues. This is escalation without announcement, and it forces a narrowing corridor of choice. At some point, continuation becomes riskier than confrontation. The side that miscalculates that moment first pays the cost. If a future drone boat accelerates at the final second instead of detonating early, the reaction window could compress to single-digit seconds. In that span, identification must be final. Engagement authority must be clear. Interceptors must function without error. A single hesitation could allow impact. A single premature shot could trigger broader retaliation. The margin for error is thin, and the Red Sea does not forgive thin margins. There is also the unseen battlefield, perception. Each probe is observed not only by the two sides involved, but by regional actors, commercial shippers, insurance markets, and global powers monitoring the balance of maritime control. If repeated probes create the impression of instability, even without damage, economic behavior shifts. Shipping reroutes become permanent. Insurance recalculations become structural. Trade corridors adapt. Strategic geography changes not through destruction, but through doubt. That is the larger contest. Not simply who wins an encounter, but who defines whether the water feels stable. For now, continuity remains intact. Carrier groups continue to transit. Commercial vessels still pass, albeit cautiously. Maritime traffic persists. That continuity is a message. It signals that low-cost pressure has not rewritten control. But deterrence is not static. It must be demonstrated repeatedly. Each new approach becomes a new examination. And examinations become harder with each repetition. The Red Sea has evolved into a laboratory for modern naval strategy. Small, inexpensive platforms challenge large, complex systems. Ambiguity challenges doctrine. Silence challenges impulse. The encounter with 6 drone boats demonstrated one truth clearly. Firepower is not always the decisive variable. Control of timing is. The fleet waited until no ambiguity remained. The boats detonated before forcing reaction. And in that narrow gap between action and restraint, dominance held. But dominance in gray zone environments must be reaffirmed continuously. Because the next probe may not follow the same script. What happens if the next wave does not explode early? What if it arrives coordinated from multiple vectors? What if electronic interference masks final approach? What if a single platform reaches critical distance before classification completes? That is the calculation now facing planners on both sides. The first probe measured discipline. The second may measure speed. And the third, if it comes, may measure consequence. The Red Sea looked calm again by afternoon. Debris dispersed. Radar screens returned to ordinary patterns. The carrier strike group continued forward, unchanged in heading and unchanged in posture. No dramatic footage dominated headlines. No emergency broadcasts shattered routine. And that is why this encounter matters. Because control at sea is not defined by explosions. It is defined by whether movement continues. In this case, it did. 6 drone boats closed in. 6 detonated themselves. And the fleet never broke stride. But the pattern has only begun. The next approach may not end in silence. And when it comes, the margin between probe and war may be measured in seconds.